Today, we are undertaking a deep and comprehensive journey into one of the most consequential and complex geopolitical rivalries of the 21st century: the relationship between India and China. This isn't just a story about a disputed border high in the remote Himalayas. It's a story about two ancient civilizations, now modern nation-states, representing a third of humanity, whose rise is reshaping the power dynamics of Asia and the entire world. For the next 30 minutes, we will unpack the layers of this relationship, from its historical roots and the festering border dispute to the sprawling economic competition and the great game being played out in the vast expanse of the Indo-Pacific Ocean. We'll explore why these two giants are locked in a state of tense competition and what it means for everyone else, including their shared neighbors. So let's begin. To truly understand the friction today, we must first travel back in time. For centuries, the relationship between the Indian subcontinent and China was one of distant, respectful exchange. The formidable barrier of the Himalayas kept them geographically separate. But ideas and trade flowed through routes like the Silk Road. Buddhism, born in India, traveled to China and became a cornerstone of its culture. This was a relationship of civilizations, not of competing states with modern hard borders. The very concept of a demarcated line separating them was foreign. This all changed with the arrival of the British Empire in India. Empires have a habit of drawing lines on maps, often with little regard for the realities on the ground. During their time, the British made attempts to delineate a border with Tibet, a region that China considered its own. This led to the creation of lines like the Johnson Line in the western sector, Aksai Chin, and the more famous McMahon Line in the eastern sector, Arunachal Pradesh. India, as the successor state to the British Raj, largely accepted these boundaries. However, China, especially after the Communist Revolution in 1949, never did. They viewed these lines as a legacy of colonialism imposed upon a weak China. In the early 1950s, after India's independence, there was a brief, optimistic period. The slogan, Hinduchini Bye-Bye, meaning Indians and Chinese are brothers, echoed in both capitals. India was one of the first non-communist nations to recognize the People's Republic of China. However, this warmth was superficial and masked deep-seated disagreements. The core issue emerged with China's annexation of Tibet in 1950. For India, Tibet had always been a peaceful, autonomous buffer zone. Suddenly, the Chinese army was at its doorstep. The situation escalated dramatically in 1959 when the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader, fled to India after a failed uprising against Chinese rule. India granting him asylum was seen as a grave provocation by Beijing. This single event shattered the fragile brotherhood. The simmering tensions finally boiled over into a full-scale war in October 1962. China launched a surprise large-scale offensive in both the western and eastern sectors. India, ill-prepared and underestimating the threat, suffered a swift and humiliating defeat. The war lasted only a month, with China declaring a unilateral ceasefire and withdrawing to its previous positions in the east. But crucially, it held on to the strategic Aksai Chin Plateau in the west. The war's impact on India cannot be overstated. It was a profound psychological blow, shattering the nation's confidence and its idealistic foreign policy. The trust was gone, replaced by a deep-seated suspicion of China's intentions that persists to this day. The 1962 war fundamentally redefined the relationship and set the stage for the decades of no war, no peace that followed. The border, the line of actual control or lack, became a live militarized frontier. So what is this line of actual control? It's important to understand that the LAC is not an international border. It's a de facto line separating Indian-controlled territory from Chinese-controlled territory. The problem is, both sides have vastly different ideas about where this line actually lies. In some areas, these differing perceptions overlap by several kilometers. This ambiguity is the root cause of the constant face-offs. For decades, troops from both sides would undertake patrols up to the point of their claim. When patrols met, standoffs would occur, but there were protocols and agreements in place established in the 1990s. To manage these situations and prevent escalation, a key part of these agreements was a commitment not to use firearms, a measure designed to prevent minor scuffles from turning into deadly conflicts. For a long time, this uneasy peace held, punctuated by occasional standoffs like the one in Dipsang in 2013 or Chumer in 2014. But the situation began to change drastically in 2017 with the Doklam standoff. This was different because it occurred not on the India-China border but in Bhutanese territory. Chinese troops tried to build a road in a region that India considers vital to its own security, particularly the vulnerable Siliguri corridor, a narrow strip of land that connects mainland India to its northeastern states. The Indian Army intervened to stop the construction, leading to a tense 73-day standoff. It was a clear signal that the competition was intensifying. Then came the summer of 2020, which marked the most serious escalation in over 4 decades. In the Galwan Valley in Ladakh, a brutal medieval-style clash took place between Indian and Chinese soldiers using rocks, clubs, and fists. It resulted in the first combat fatalities on the Lak since the 1970s. This event completely tore up the old rulebook. The trust, whatever little remained, was annihilated. Since then, both sides have moved tens of thousands of troops, tanks, and artillery pieces to the border. The Lak has transformed from a patrol-managed frontier into a heavily fortified zone, with both armies digging in for the long haul. While some disengagement has occurred at specific friction points, the overall military buildup continues unabated. Both sides are also engaged in a frantic infrastructure race, building roads, bridges, tunnels, and airfields to improve their ability to move troops and supplies to the high-altitude front. This rivalry, however, is not confined to the icy peaks of the Himalayas. It extends into the warm waters of the Indian Ocean and the broader Indo-Pacific. China's growing naval power and its strategic investments in ports across the region have raised alarm bells in New Delhi. This is often referred to as the string of pearls theory, the idea that China is establishing a network of military and commercial facilities in countries around India's periphery, such as the Gwadar port in Pakistan, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and a base in Djibouti. From India's perspective, this looks like strategic encirclement. It threatens India's traditional role as the dominant power in the Indian Ocean, a region through which vital global trade routes pass. In response, India has ramped up its own maritime strategy. It is investing heavily in its navy, expanding its operational reach, and enhancing surveillance of the Indian Ocean. It has also deepened strategic partnerships with other naval powers who share its concerns about China's assertiveness. This brings us to the Quad, or the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, an informal strategic forum comprising India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. While the Quad insists it is not a military alliance, it is widely seen as a democratic coalition aimed at balancing China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. The revival and strengthening of the Quad is one of the most significant geopolitical developments in recent years, and a clear manifestation of the India-China competition on a global stage. The economic relationship adds another layer of complexity. For a long time, the mantra was to separate the border dispute from the economic ties. Trade boomed, making China one of India's largest trading partners. However, the trade relationship is massively imbalanced. India imports far more from China than it exports, creating a huge trade deficit. The 2020 border clash changed the economic calculus as well. A wave of economic nationalism swept through India. The Indian government banned hundreds of Chinese mobile applications, including TikTok, citing national security concerns. It also tightened rules for Chinese investment in the country. There is now a major push within India for Atmanirbhar Bharat, or a self-reliant India, a policy aimed at reducing dependence on Chinese imports and boosting domestic manufacturing. This is part of a wider global trend of de-risking and diversifying supply chains away from China. And India sees a major opportunity to position itself as an alternative global manufacturing hub. So, where does this leave us? The India-China relationship is currently at its lowest point in decades. The border is tense and heavily militarized, with the risk of accidental escalation ever present. Diplomatic and military talks are ongoing but have yielded little meaningful progress in resolving the core issues. Strategic competition in the maritime domain is intensifying. Economic ties are strained and being reevaluated. The Brotherhood of the 1950s is a distant, almost mythical memory. What we have now is a deeply adversarial relationship between two nuclear-armed neighbors. They are locked in a long-term strategic rivalry that will define the future of Asia. For countries in the region, including Pakistan, this rivalry presents both challenges and opportunities, forcing them to make complex strategic choices as they navigate the competing interests of these two Asian giants. Looking ahead, a full-scale war remains unlikely as the costs for both sides would be catastrophic. However, the era of cooperation has been firmly replaced by an era of competition. A state of prolonged armed coexistence, punctuated by periodic crises, seems to be the new normal. The future of this relationship will not only determine the destiny of its 2.8 billion people, but will also be a key factor in shaping the new global order that is slowly and often painfully taking shape in the 21st century. The story of India and China is a grand saga with no clear end in sight. What are your thoughts on the future of this relationship? Can these two giants find a way to coexist peacefully, or is a long-term conflict inevitable? Let me know your perspective in the comments section below. If you found this analysis helpful, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the most important geopolitical issues of our time. Thank you for watching.